with notice of meeting. Pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law of 1975, this meeting notice was sent to the Asbury Park Press on April 18, 2019, and has been duly advertised to the Asbury Park Press issue of April 22, 2019. All municipal clerks of the townships and boroughs within the regional high school district have been duly notified, and the requirements of posting of notices have been met on April 18, 2019. Could everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Toscano, are there any changes to the executive agenda that you wish to know?
Only one change, Mr. President, just to note that the board did not discuss in number 4, negotiations update FREA. That was noted, it was not discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Toscano. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 6, 2020 reorganization meeting?
Motion.
Mr. Bruno, second, Ms. Cappiello.
Any discussion? Sean, could I get a roll call?
Mr. Bruno?
Here.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
Mrs. Cappiello?
Yes.
Mrs. Bigley?
Yes.
Mrs. Lavin?
Yes.
Mr. Messinger?
Yes.
Mr. Parisi?
Yes.
Mr. Espatola?
Yes. Communications are on file in the office of the board secretary. Reports. I'll yield the floor to our superintendent, Mr. Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Espatola. So we're going to open it up with something a little bit differently this evening. We wanted to recognize one of our faculty and staff members. So could Mr. Christopher Mayer and Dr. Dave Bleakley come on up front, please? Just Chris, I'm going to read a couple things about you, so just hang tight for a minute. So we have the photo ops as well, perfect. So on December 10th, 2019, Mr. Mara was coaching a home swim meet as the new head coach of the Marlboro High School swim team. Is that correct? Yeah, that was quite an introduction. Right before the first break of the meet, Coach Mara noticed that one of his swimmers appeared to be in distress. As he approached the swimmer, the young man and found out what happened, the young man collapsed into his arms, and it turns out that the young boy was having a cardiac issue. And from that point forward, Mr. Mara administered CPR. The YMCA staff also assisted, and we were told with no hesitation from the first responders that they saved that young man's life. And so we wanted to recognize Mr. Mara publicly with what we're calling the Citizens Life-Saving Award, and I'll read it to you. The Freehold Regional High School District Special Recognition Award presented to Mr. Christopher Mara. In recognition of the selfless act of rendering life-saving aid to a student athlete, your heroic efforts on December 10th, 2019 were essential to saving the life of a student athlete who experienced a sudden cardiac episode. So thank you for staying calm under pressure, Christopher, and we appreciate it. Bear with me with the microphone. It's obviously having a mind of its own this evening. So a few items from my report, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Boyce for a financial report. Grade 8 orientations have been completed at this point in time. The principals, we had packed houses in all of them, went very, very well. We certainly addressed the funding issue as well at those evenings. And we're looking forward to welcoming the class of 2024. We also met with our executive student cabinet last week, and for those who don't know what that is, those are 6 students who represent each of our 6 high schools. Dr. Hazel and I usually meet with them on a regular basis. Each year, there's a competitive application process at each high school, and they work on a project over the scope of the year. And it culminates with a presentation to our new faculty and staff at the end of the year about what they expect in teachers in the Freehold Regional High School District. And we had a terrific meeting with those young folks, and they're going to be running some focus groups for us across the high schools, talking specifically about grading and assessment and what that looks like from their vantage point, and facilitating some structured conversations with their peers. So we're excited for that. We had last week a parent presentation by Timothy Shoemaker at Colts Neck High School, if anybody was able to make that. The Colts Neck Alliance generously sponsored that. That individual is an expert on vaping and sort of the most current trends. And while we've seen a crescendo of vaping that sort of subsided somewhat over the past year or so, it's still obviously a huge problem with teenagers, not just in the Freehold Regional High School District, but across the country. You know, and New Jersey just took the first step to ban some of these flavored vapes. You know, you can't tell me that a bubblegum flavored vape wasn't marketed to a teenager. And we're hopeful that that will make some difference. And the unfortunate reality with that is that I think that smoking as a whole had really largely sort of stopped for the most part in schools, and we have an entire new generation that's largely addicted to nicotine as a result of the vaping epidemic. And as many programs as we can offer to our parents as well to educate them about what that looks like, what to look for, signs, how some of these things are concealed, that's important to us. So we were happy to host that event. As far as the ongoing budget issues, before I turn it over to Mr. Boyce, you know, a couple things have happened over the past several weeks, and so every meeting now, I want to say probably for the past 2 years or so, I've spoken about the funding issue in the state of New Jersey, and explicitly Senate Bill 2, which changed the way the SFRA was calculated, which is how schools are funded. And on the back end of that was a $30 million reduction to the Freehold Regional High School District. And so last year we lost 1.8 million thereabouts, this year 3.8 million, but next year and the next 2 subsequent years, we estimate that reduction to be somewhere between $6 and $10 million. And I'll let Mr. Boyce get into some more on that. But what that adds up to is an incredibly difficult position for this school district to be in. We've lived lean, we're highly efficient, our cost per pupil is very low. We've drawn down our staff over that time. We have a declining enrollment, about 1 to 1.4% a year, thereabouts. We've reduced about 36 general ed positions since 2014-15, and administrative positions as well. And so we've done the responsible thing. And it puts us into a very difficult position. And so now the budget, the way that the budget works in New Jersey is the governor will give his budget address at the end of this month, and then we'll receive our state aid notice within about 48 hours. And so we've been advocating directly to Governor Murphy to intervene in some way in the situation. And for folks who've paid attention, we put out an online petition that garnered about 13,000 signatures and comments. And we wrote an open letter to the governor as well, outlining some of the situations here in Freehold Regional. But I think perhaps the most significant part of that letter was looking at a Freehold Regional household in 2009, and an income of $100,000 with a $400,000 home paid somewhere around $4,100 in school taxes in 2009. 10 years later, a $400,000 home and a $100,000 income pays $5,300 in school taxes in Freehold Regional footprint. What that is that the district's ability to pay, as outlined by the state, has been, in our estimation, artificially inflated. It puts us in a very difficult position, and I'll let Mr. Boyce get into some of the nuances of that. So we are going to continue to advocate as vocally as possible, and that includes a lawsuit, taking the state of New Jersey to court, the Department of Ed explicitly, to release the formula of how they determine this. Joining a group called Support Our Students that's comprised of about 95 other districts across the state losing state aid, advocating with that group. I chair the legislative arm of that committee, and we've been working sort of tirelessly and putting out all sorts of information, meeting with our elected officials and our state legislators over and over again, repeatedly, our municipal officials as well. Over the past 2 weeks, Mr. Boyce and I have been meeting with all the township administrators just to discuss with them what some of this might look like for our district. The board president, Mr. Acetola, myself, Mr. Boyce, thank Senator Gopal for his time. He met with us a couple weeks ago, and we had a very, very productive conversation with him as well, and we're hopeful that there might be some movement on legislation that might offset some of these reductions. But at this point in time, the district is facing 3 straight years of somewhere between $6 and $10 million in reduction after we've already been cut the past 2 years. So that's a significant impact, and I don't want to understate it because it's going to have a devastating impact on our ability to deliver the same sort of program that we have for the children in these communities. And so everyone in the audience, I would ask that you continue to advocate, continue to educate yourself. We have an entire webpage that really explains the situation, explains what you can do as a parent, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, and clearly outlines sort of the process in how some of this is determined. And it goes as far back as 2017. We were testifying before the Senate Ed Committee and the Senate Assembly Committee saying this is going to be devastating to our school system. And so we've been out in front of this, but now it's here. And so the work that is ahead of us is to continue to advocate and to continue to move forward. And with that said, Mr. Boyce, I'll turn it over to you for a more specific financial update.
Yeah, so board, as we've done for the last couple meetings and will continue to do, I want to keep you up to date on the status of the budget development. Just a couple of spin-off comments from Dr. Sampson's. The process of artificially inflating a community's ability to pay has another purpose to it, because the higher that number is, the less the state has to pay. So that's why it's happening. And in Mr. Sampson's example, it's not going to make sense to any regular citizen that if my home has a fair market value of 400 and my household income is 100, then 10 years later with the same scenario, suddenly I have the ability to pay another $1,000, $4,000 to $5,000. So that just, I think that kind of micro example really brings home what the actual impact is. So S2 is going to be something that I want to talk about here, but later in my comments I'm going to make a very, very strong distinction between S2 and infrastructure projects recently offered through referendum. S2, although we continue to vigorously advocate for changes to S2, and we offer different ideas of how to smooth that with understanding the legislators' position and what they will need to be able to, what they find palatable to live with, we still need to continue to prepare for what is currently on the books. So when we talk about $6 million to $10 million, just to put that in context, it's a $200 million annual budget for the district right now. So 6 to 10 million is a significant reduction in revenue. The other component of that is that on the expenditure side, costs do go up. So to the extent they do go up, add that to the total problem that needs to be handled on the appropriation side. So what we've done is we've selected 2 primary areas that can have significant dollar returns on them. And as we've discussed before, one of them is courtesy busing and one of them is participation fees. So courtesy busing, which is a quick review, that if you are 2.5 miles from your school, the state does not require busing for those students, even in areas of safety. So that's what we're currently gearing up for. And when you do that, you can't just simply modify existing routes. What it amounts to is redesigning all of the routes. And along the way, we're able to tweak some things that should have been tweaked before, but also institute some new ideas where we're designing them to have more students walk out, more students who are being bused walk out closer to the top of the neighborhood, right? So maybe one street in to the neighborhood rather than driving through those whole neighborhoods, which allows us to be more efficient. Freehold Regional's footprint is 200 square miles, so it's a large area to cover. And we need to deliver kids within a reasonable period of time. An hour and a half on the bus to get to where you could drive to there in 20 minutes is not what we want to do to the students who could use the sleep. So that work is underway. We deliver approximately 12,000 students to and from school, and that includes the vocational programs, it includes out-of-district placements for special needs programs. As far as within our schools, it's about 10,000, and approximately 30% of that, 3,000 students are within the 2.5 miles. So it's another thing that when in our meetings with each municipal administrator that we've had is to talk about the involvement of their police department as we work through traffic control, the logistics of that, because there's going to be a lot more traffic in front of our schools there. So as that work is underway, another component of it, other than reducing just the annual costs for contractors and or our own forces, is that we can greatly reduce the number of buses that we buy. So buses have a useful life of 12, it can be extended to 15 in some circumstances, but eventually they age out and you simply can't use them anymore under state law as a school bus. So of the 13 54 passenger buses that are due, and we have approximately 140 school vehicles. So of the 50 big buses, 54 passengers, the 13 of those that are due, we are not replacing any. And of the vans, we are replacing 3 instead of 6. So there's also that savings along with insurance and gasoline and those types of residual maintenance, those types of residual. So with the newly designed routes, the transportation department is running them, which is a best practice to make sure that what they've done on a screen actually makes sense in the moment in rush hour traffic, and we can rely on the timing of that. So as I said, that work is well underway. So I just wanted to brief you on that. Participation fees, I did assemble a small internal working group to consider the many aspects of participation fees. So there's fee structure issues, and there's a number of different ways to do that. Family caps, collections, timelines, a mechanism for appeals for extenuating circumstances, consideration for free and reduced lunches. But what in essence we want to do, and there was generally two ways to approach this, to achieve some level of savings, a material level of savings that we'll need as we head into year 1 of our 3 years, possibly more, of significant cuts. And that is to reduce the number of opportunities would be a way to do that. And then that would minimize or eliminate participation fees, or keep the same level of opportunities in sports and clubs, and charge a participation fee. So as we are considering every aspect of this that we can think of, as with any decision, there are going to be pros and cons to whichever choices we make. And so we need to weigh those pros and cons to make the best decision that we can. And that's what we're in the process of doing. And we're off to a very good start on gathering the data, understanding the participation, and understanding the different price points and fee structures and what that would yield. So you'll be hearing more on that. The governor's budget address is scheduled for Tuesday, February 25th, and as Dr. Sampson said, they're required by statute to let districts know what their state aid is within 48 hours of the governor's budget address. Now the governor has the flexibility to move that budget address back, and very often they do. So we may be in a position where we don't know our state aid until the middle of March. I don't know what the plan is. Currently it's scheduled for February 25th. Within 2 days of that, we'll see exactly where we stand. The other things to just mention as we move through our budget development process, each of the administrators are planning and designing their budgets for their particular areas of the operation, and that's coming to us. We have collective negotiation agreements that come due that are under negotiations now, and that's three different bargaining units that we're working on. But something, and here's where I want to make a really clear distinction, because I don't know that everybody separated properly the issue of S2 and reduced revenue and a referendum for infrastructure, roofs, paving, that type of thing, two of which have not been successful. Passing a referendum does not solve the S2 problem. A referendum that does not pass amplifies the S2 problem to the tune of add another $5 million a year for 4 years. So where we're saying 6 to 10, 6 to 10, 6 to 10 in reductions, it'll be more like 10 to 15, 10 to 15, 10 to 15, right? So, which makes it a monumental task. We are working with the architect to further cull down our list of absolute priority items, look at alternatives to a traditional approach. For example, roofing, it's tear off and rebuild. There's an assembly, there's a roof assembly, a number of different layers of different material. But some of the roofing companies now are offering some are a roll-on right over the existing, or it could be applied in a liquid form, but offering 20-year warranties on that. So we're looking closely to that. It's a relatively new technology, so but it's significantly less expensive. So any areas like that we can explore, we're certainly doing as we consider options for facility infrastructure improvements that are not going to be contained in the annual operating budget. Okay. As I said, if we're considering a third referendum and any other possible funding scenarios, but if we're unsuccessful with that, then it does fall into that annual operating budget, and then those numbers of hardship year after year, they raise significantly. I think that's really, those are the main aspects of budget development and the status of them. So, I just wanted to make you aware of that. Just one more comment on the courtesy busing. Many of the K-8 districts have some form of courtesy busing in place, and they're elementary districts, right? So from kindergartners up to 8th grade, and although a district is free to do whatever they want with giving consideration for bus stops and the like, and for courtesy busing, many of those districts, because of their little ones, have come up with systems to determine if it's safe for a kid to walk to a bus stop at this place. You know, are there sidewalks? What's the volume of traffic? What's the speed limit on the road? Things like that, point systems to make a determination. We have, and we've shared this with the administrators of the municipalities, we have no plans to offer, to consider hazardous routes in any form. And there's also no plans to offer subscription busing, which is something that districts also do for those students that don't receive busing, is to facilitate separate runs for those kids at a cost, at a pay. Because Freehold regionals, the high schools are so large, and our footprint is so large, it's almost cost prohibitive for us to consider that. Not to say that we're going to rule it out forever. We might see 1 year, see what the level of interest is for that, and consider it. But right now, it's not currently in the mix, either subscription busing or hazardous busing. And that's the way that we plan to proceed. Mr. Bruno?
So the hazardous busing route, you already know that. We know that for all the towns. That's something the towns know. We know that.
Well,
We know where they are.
well, no, it's a different interpretation per municipality. The state literature says Board of Educations are not required by law to provide busing for students who live less than remote, so less than 2.5 miles from school, even for safety reasons. So the state has pretty much taken that off the table. And as funding goes, there is some funding that districts receive for transportation. They don't count courtesy students in that. So there would be no change in funding as a result of that, just a change in cost.
So, like, I ride my bike around this area a lot, so there's a lot of hazardous bike roads, my interpretation of hazardous, but, so when we do the courtesy busing routes, that's gonna be part of it?
No, there will be no courtesy busing routes.
Okay. So there'll be no busing for even the hazardous areas?
Correct. Hazardous it's very subjective. It broadens responsibility to other areas of the community, but for the district, that there's no requirement to bus students who are within the 2.5 miles, even for safety reasons.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that for people who do, or students that do get bused, they're gonna have to walk further to the bus stop?
Yeah, we're going to try and make them more sensible. I mean, right now, our policy states that you can have a student walk up to 1/2 mile to their bus stop. So, and in most cases, it's far less than that. So if you have a neighborhood a hypothetical neighborhood that's fairly self-enclosed, we may have those kids, which some of the K-8s are already doing, and that just makes our run more efficient time-wise.
But the 1/2 mile is Freehold Regional's policy?
Yes.
Does the state have any regulation?
My interpretation of it is the state is saying a kid can walk 2.5 miles.
Within its boundaries? Okay.
And we don't have a policy, Freehold Regional is 2.5, that's our policy is.
No. So policy-wise, the policy will reflect the decisions that we make. It doesn't determine our decisions. It is a reflection of our decisions.
And Mr. Boyce, just to clarify, the 2.5 mile radius Mr. Boyce is referencing, that's set by the state. The state makes no determinations or limits as to bus stops. Bus stops is local decision only.
So one correction, and I had flipped the vans, buses being purchased, not purchased. So we have 15 vans that are aging out, we're buying 3. We have 6 buses, large buses, aging out, we're buying 0. one of the problems with finalizing this is there are certain components that we don't know yet. Who are the students that got into the vocational programs, and where do they live, right? And who are the students that got into our own magnet programs, and where do they live? Because in both cases, they could live anywhere within that 200 square mile footprint. So we've anticipated, having seats and looking at the numbers that do attend the vocational programs. So there's some assumptions in where we are in the process right now, and as we get that information, we can finalize our transportation situation. So that concludes my status report on the budget. Perhaps when we see each other next in a public meeting, we'll have what actual state aid is, and perhaps we won't. But as it looks right now, if the governor's address is on February 25th, then I'll know by the end of the month. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce, for
I have
your
a question.
presentation.
I
Okay.
had a question for Dr. Sampson. The letter you sent to the governor, is that public? Yes. Because the letter that the superintendent sent to the governor, I don't know if anybody saw it, it's excellent. And for me, I've been on the board for 3 years now, not always understanding S2 and try to explain to my people in my town about S2, it's not always easy to explain. And the letter that he did last week actually, it was so great to follow, easy to follow. If you can get a copy of it, I think it's probably on our website. It's so well done, it's so easy to explain to people. So, good job on that.
Sure.
The one more thing that I forgot to mention is that the budget that's currently under development includes no capital projects. So no roofing, no paving, none of that pocket of essential needs. So none of that is in there right now. And again, just to reinforce the idea, S2 and referendum are entirely different things. What I did hear routinely during times where the referendum was being considered was, well, so if the referendum passes, then we're all good. No, if the referendum passes, then we are where I just described we were. If it doesn't pass, that's when things get ratcheted up to an even more extreme area that will deepen cuts and accelerate the timing of it.
Sean, so do you have a estimated price tag which you can put on not putting capital projects into the budget?
It's certainly not an ideal, not at all what we want to do, but we'll continue to Band-Aid them the best we can. And if the board decides to go forward with a November question, that decision will really direct us into one direction or another.
But do you have a dollar amount that would save if you left the capital projects out of the budget? How much money are we talking?
I would do at least $5 million.
Every year, basically.
We have 20 million that is imminent, and by that I mean must be handled within the next 4 years, and much of that should have been handled last year.
Right. But let me just be sure I understand that you're saying in developing this budget, you are looking to leave those capital projects out of this budget.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the goal is to bring forth another referendum on election day that is purely the infrastructure, which is one side of the coin that Mr. Boyce is talking about, and S2 being the other side of the coin. I think it would be, I think it's a difficult position not to go forward one more time with some of these essential projects, because what often the sound bites out there don't fully capture is that we have 6 large high schools. Aside from Colts Neck High School, which is 20 years old now, there's not a building less than 50 or 60 years old. Freehold High School is 100 years old. The transportation depot that we have with our busing is fairly dilapidated. And the board office is a 100-year-old elementary school. So all of these things have general maintenance costs associated with them. And to give scale, one of the boilers went at Marlboro High School this year was $800,000. And so,
Yeah, just, and it's been said before, so many of you in the audience may have heard this before. We did a number of things over the past decade or so to really leverage subsidies and other state funding and mechanisms within the confines of our annual budget, all in an effort to align a referendum with the expiring debt. So the district only had one bond issue from 20 years ago. The final payment on that is in March, I believe, and so from a tax, this is counterintuitive, but the things that we're talking about here, there's 4.1, there's over $4 million of debt service property taxes that is going to disappear from the next budget presented to the community. So even with a 2% increase on the general fund, the operations levy, taxes are still going to go down in the district. The total tax levy will go down in the district next year because that 4.1 million debt service is no longer necessary. Had a referendum passed, it would have been aligned so that it would have been a smooth transition without spikes and peaks and valleys. So if we are successful in that referendum, the district will see a slight tax decrease in next year, but then year over year, then it would spike back up to the level which was anticipated to just seamlessly move from one bond issue to another. But when we get to a point of promoting a referendum, we'll make all of that very clear.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce. Now it's time for board reports. We had one committee meeting, that's curriculum and instruction, and Mr. Messenger, if you'd like to report on that, please.
Okay, we had our curriculum committee meeting this evening, and essentially it was a very full agenda. I mean, we saw the curriculum writing schedule for the 1920 school year, which is occurring in core social studies and English classes, and also in the business and science elective courses. And we really discussed how science electives in particular get changed. For instance, zoology is going to be replaced with honors lab, anatomy and physiology, and we learned how and why these decisions get made. And just so everybody knows, when these decisions are made, even the college and the college advisor for Freehold Regional gets involved, because of course we want to prepare our students for their post-high school education. With respect to the magnet programs, we got an update on the 2020 agenda here. The applications and auditions are done. Acceptances are coming next week, February 18th most likely, and then the students have to respond back by March 9th. Just FYI, science and engineering got the most applications. They got 235, and business administration got the second most, 220. And with respect to the IB program, obviously that's been in this school, Freehold Township, for the longest period of time. This is where it started. So this year's class of 2020 has 20 students, and Howell, which was the second school to adopt it, their first graduating class is going to be next year, 2021. There's 28 students there. And of course, we made the decision where if Freehold Township is not your home school, but you want to do IB, you can come to Freehold Township. So for the class of 2024, 63 students expressed interest, and most of those, 45, are not zoned for Freehold Township High School. We have been speaking for the last couple of years on the Career Pathways Grant. Of course, that started at Freehold Borough in web design. The second pathway in health professions was added, and next year, it's going to be at even more schools. So this is a program that's expanded to more of our footprint, and the district is adopting classes from NJIT in web design, and in the health professions, it's Rutgers. So we actually have students here getting college credit from two pretty prestigious schools in New Jersey. So that Career Pathways Grant is definitely money well spent. Of course, our incoming freshmen next year are going to be taking geometry their first year. So that's changed. We talked about the change in math sequencing and at the 8th grade orientations, this was mentioned to the incoming freshmen for next year. And then switching gears to the seal of biliteracy, New Jersey gives a student recognition if you're literate in a second language. And this year we had 68 students get that seal. And then lastly, with respect to the Summer Academy program, we have original credit, we have credit recovery, and AP Bridge. And original credit and credit recovery, you always had to pay for that. AP Bridge did not have a fee. But for the first time, we're going to have to be charging a $50 fee to AP Bridge this year. But even with that fee, it looks like there's still a lot of enthusiasm for it. We were pretty satisfied with the people who indicated that they wanted to do. So it was a very full agenda, and that was the wrap-up of it.
Thank you, Mr. Messenger. Moving on with the agenda that I have in front of me. May I have a motion to, I'm sorry, Sean. Yes. May I have a motion to approve resolutions, to approve the appointment of a New Jersey School Board Association delegate?
Motion.
Motion, Pete. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? I'm going to appoint Mr. Parisi for this discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mrs. Cappiello?
Yes.
Mrs. Hagley?
Yes.
Mrs. Lavin?
Yes.
Mr. Messenger?
Yes?
Mr. Parisi?
Yes.
Mr. Asatola?
Yes.
Mr. President, if I may, I just want to thank you for appointing me to this position.
And thank you for asking for it. It's a very important role that you're going to have to play, and thank you. Okay. Mr. Boyce, are there any changes to the agenda that you wish to note?
There are. In addition to the addendum in the back of the room and at your seats, board members, two additional names, one in the area of G1, approval of resignations. We've added Shamir Mohammed, a bus driver, to that list. And on G2, approval of retirements, we have added Patricia Dermadnig, custodian, to that list. In addition to that, just amendments to the agendas that you have in front of you. The first, J5, which is overnight excursions. It's an attachment for the specific list of events that our students are going to. The second item down is DECA, Distributed Education Clubs of America, and the agenda as printed and presented include Freehold Township High School and Marlborough High School, and the number of students and the number of chaperones associated with that. This change, which will be at the table here, also will include Freehold High School, Freehold Borough High School, so 3 schools in total rather than the 2. And the total number of students attending is 206. and the total number of chaperones is 29. And finally, on Resolution J13, which is approval of staff members to participate in the extended school year program. We're adding, there's a list of names that you'll see on your agenda. We'd like to add one name, a paraprofessional. The name is Donna Bartolomeo. So as addended and amended, that's the agenda up for consideration.
Mr. President, just one other item, I apologize. We will have to pull G12. G12 will not be offered tonight. This resolution G12.
Okay, so we'll pull Q12 from the agenda where
Yes.
I know it's Now it's time for public participation. And as I was preparing this, I'm struggling with some of the handwriting, my eyesight, and also the lighting up here. So I have, we have 4 speakers for public participation. The first speaker, Pascal Vallette, am I right? If you could come up to the mic, say your name and the township that you come from.
So my name is Pascal Vallet. I'm from Freehold township. So I have one main question that lead me to be here, and that's maybe something that is of the interest of others here. But one of the comments that you made about the magnet program lead me to a very short other question here. I'm not yet in the high school here. My daughter is in Eisenhower. She did the test for the magnet program. She's super interested by one of the program that you're offering. And she was very surprised to hear so many of her friends questioning why she applied to do the test, because she was coming to this school anyway. And so she realized that many of her friends who do the magnet program test, it's a way to choose the high school where they want to go, and not necessarily by interest. So there is a chance there is a large number of students who are really interested in the program, but will not get a chance to go in the program, because other students who want to go in a specific high school will go first, because they will have a better result to the test, but less motivation to go through the program. So I believe that's probably something that you're aware of, and I'm not sure if you're planning to do something about it, because it's maybe frustrating to know maybe like 30% of the kids who are going to be in this program are just want to be in this high school and not specifically interested by the program. So that's a comment. I don't know if there's an answer to that.
So the answer is, the short answer is that we have a competitive process for those programs. It's a thorough process that takes in a number of factors, whether that's a test, an interview, an application, demonstrated interest in the program, and then those students are accepted accordingly. It's a very, most of the programs have a very specific schedule, and students that are in that program have been accepted to the program. We don't question a student's motives when they demonstrate a genuine interest in a program and do well on all the criteria that is put out there in order for them to be accepted into that program. We have 15 different magnet programs across the high school. Students may say they want to go to a particular high school, but at the end of the day, they have to check all those other boxes in order to be accepted into that program. And I would err on the side of believing in the students' genuine passion and interest for those programs.
Thank you. So my main question, the reason I was coming here today, even though my daughter is not yet in high school, it's the bus. And I'm struggling a bit with the argumentation that you provide. I feel in some way when you it looks like there is not really a choice. You don't have a choice on the money that you get maybe from the state, but you have a choice to know where you're going to take the money. And the choice that you make to take on the bus, and the argument that you say that even for safety reasons, the 2.5 miles, you don't need to offer courtesy buses. The first thing we read on the website, on the Freehold website, is safety and eligibility are two of the factors that impact public transportation decision. The first word we see is safety. And I feel a bit like there was an experiment in the 1960s where we were asking to someone to push some electricity and to electrocute someone else. And they were doing it because they have the right to do it, and because they felt that they have no choice, they have to do it. And I felt a bit like that here. You don't have the money, so you tell us that we need to go to talk to the governor in order for him to do something for us. But you can do something because you can choose to cut differently in order to not put the safety of our children at stake. There is a research, and I'm very busy, and I'm working a lot. I have some long days, so I just look online when I was listening to you at the same time. There is a research by Rutgers University and the US Department of Transportation in 2012 that was explaining that 32% of total enrolled students in 2007 were enrolled in courtesy bus. So they were taking the courtesy bus. That the main reason why the courtesy bus was offered to the family was for safety reason. And then there is some statistic on the risk. And so I'm going to read you a short part here, a very short part of this report here. It says that while school buses constitute 25% of all school trips by students, they accounted for only 4% of the injuries and 2% of the fatalities involving school travel. And then a bit further, there is some statistic on walking and bicycling, which constitute 12% and 2% of the school trips. However, they constitute 16% and 6% of the crash injuries. So 25% of the transportation is by bus for only 2% of 4% of injuries, and the bicycle, it's 2% of the school trips for 6% of the injuries. That means that the decision that you take here, for me, it's not if we are going to have an accident and a student one day coming to the high school and realizing that his best friend is not here because he's dead on the road. The question is not when, is not if, it's when. And so I'm struggling really with this decision because I work in education for 20 years. I'm a school principal. I've worked in 3 different continents, 4 different countries as a school leader. And as you know, the thing we always say is safety first. And so the decision you take today is not guided by safety. And I understand the struggle, I understand the difficulty, I understand also the valuable choice that you make here by saying we're not going to cut on the program and the quality of education. But if my daughter cannot complete the IB because she has an accident on the road when she's going to come to the school, the quality of the education that you provide is meaningless. And that's why in the education world, we always say safety first. So I don't know what I'm saying here, the impact it can have. I'm not going to go to talk to the governor because it's not the governor who made this choice. You made this choice. So that's why I'm sharing with you. Again, forgive the naivety of my question maybe because, again, I have very limited information through social media and the letter that we have received from you. So maybe there is a lot of things I don't know, but I feel that maybe what I'm saying here is a reflection of many other parents who feel the same way. Thank you.
Your comments are well appreciated. So the short answer, there's a couple things. I wouldn't expect any parent to put their child in an unsafe situation, you know, and there's going to be a lot of family decisions that have to be made. The difficult part in all of this is that this year is the easy year. So as bad as this is going to be this year, this is just the start of 1 year with 3 subsequent years coming. So this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is going to go away in this district. The larger part is when we make decisions, our core mission is educating children, providing them opportunities to learn and grow and thrive. We're not in the transportation business. And so when we have to make a decision about what is going to be reduced first before we really start erasing what we're doing in the core mission of educating children, this is just the unfortunate reality. This is just the first layer of what's going to be peeled back. And that's why we make the comments about looking for legislative relief down the road, because we in our heart of hearts can't believe that the legislators that supported this understood just how fully it was going to impact our district in particular. And so we know that there are numerous very difficult decisions that are ahead for this district, and none of them that we want or like or want to have to make. But in terms of year one, in that $6 to $10 million reduction, we know that we can pull back by law the busing in order to save the core mission of what we're trying to do in the schools. And if that buys us another year of not absolutely gutting our academic programs for our kids, that's where we're going to land first. But make no mistake, if nothing changes, that is only this. We'll look back on this year as having been the very easy year to make these decisions, which is an unfortunate reality. It's not something that any of us take lightly. It's not something that any of us want to do. We have prided ourselves in this district on really providing opportunities for students and figuring out what we have to do in order to get those. And Mr. Boyce noted, even though traditionally the state says 2.5 miles, we've always picked up generally within 0.3 miles. When we're losing millions upon millions for multiple years, and our budget at the end of this is actually 7 years later going to be $30 million less than what it is, and you're not even factoring in the cost of inflation, the infrastructure needs that aren't even included in that, this district will be an absolute shell of itself. And one of the things that I keep pointing to is that property values will follow that. And when these 6 high schools, literally, when you're shutting the lights off in these 6 high schools in these communities, folks will wake up then. And we're hoping that something changes, but we have to also plan and be realist about what kind of decisions we have to make. And I don't think anybody up here is sleeping well thinking about the decisions that we have to make, and we know that it's for us to preserve as much of this district until folks realize just how drastic this is here, because once something is gone, it's not going to come back. And so we're trying to save our academic programs, our extracurricular activities that kids find homes and niches in and that really resonate with them. And that is our core mission, and so that is what we're protecting most diligently as we move forward. But sir, you make excellent points, and there are no easy answers here.
There are, and I echo the superintendent's comments about your points and the importance of that. So, without mincing words with it, each family will make a determination as to what is the safest way for their child to arrive at school. And with working families, there's a hardship involved in that. But regarding safety, that'll be an individual family decision to make arrangements, walk if that's what they decide is safe, but that's going to be that family's call.
Okay, we have the second speaker on the list, and I cannot read this, but it's Jennifer from Foss, maybe? Please come up, say your full name and the township you represent.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Foss. I'm from Freehold Township. My son will be entering Freehold Borough High School in the fall. I am also echoing the concern about safety and the buses. I understand that it's not required by state law. I'm asking you to consider the safety implications, especially going from where I live to Freehold Borough High School on Kozlowski Road. It's extremely dangerous. There are no sidewalks. It's a speed limit of 50 miles an hour. The only accident I've ever been in my life was on Kozlowski Road where I was rear-ended, and my car was totaled. I'm getting a little emotional about it because, you know, I have a 14-year-old son whose head's in the clouds 90% of the time, unfortunately. I work full-time, my husband works full-time. If he's gonna be at school and he wants to get home, he's gonna try to walk home. And I can tell him not to. If there's something at school maybe, and there's something for him to remain at school until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, maybe that's an alternative for you all to consider. You know, since you don't wanna cut programs and you don't wanna cut clubs and activities and sports and all those things. But I really am here to implore you to take the safety of these children into consideration. I don't know all the districts, I don't know all the high schools, I don't know all the neighborhoods, I know mine. And I know in mine, you're gonna have kids in Seven Oaks, you're gonna have kids in Poets Corner, walking on Kozlowski to school every day, and that's not good. It's a recipe for disaster. I understand money, I understand state law, but I'm begging you to consider either safety of these kids and making some kind of decision to get them bused there safely. Again, I understand family decision. Not everybody's in a position to run home from work and pick up kids, to carpool, to do this, do that. I could probably work it out if I had to, but I'm not everybody. So if there's something else you can consider in making these determinations, keeping safety in mind, is there a safe harbor for these kids to stay at school maybe until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock when a parent's able to come pick them up? But that's really all I had to say. I'm a new parent. I'm coming in the fall with my son. I'm looking forward to him being a part of this district and myself becoming an active participant. But, you know, like I said, I'm a little emotional about it because just the thought of how black and white it is coming in here. I thought there would be some debates and conversations on something about what's safe and can we deem something a hazardous route. But it's just black and white. Hazardous route doesn't matter. It's very upsetting. So that's my comment. Take it for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Cheryl Allen. Okay. And just indicate what township you're from.
Yeah, Freehold Township.
Thank you.
I guess to talk about all these budget cuts, I just wanted to understand, besides cutting busing, what is your solution besides getting our taxes raised? Since I've moved here, my property taxes increased 18%. So, you know, when this came up on the ballot, I voted against it because there's a feeling in the community that tax dollars are not being utilized appropriately, that there's a lot of waste in the spending. And that's my feeling. So, I mean, other than the governor raising our property taxes again, how do we mitigate this issue? I mean, busing, I can understand how these parents feel. I mean, I think a couple of years ago there was a principal that was run over by a car. He was walking his dog one day, I think in this area. I can't remember the story fully. He was killed. Superintendent, right. I mean, when I went to school, I walked over a mile to school, but it was different. People weren't distracted with their phones and all these other kinds of things. I would not feel safe for my child to walk down some of these roads to school. You know, so I mean, the solutions, I'm just curious as to what's being discussed. I mean, there's some things that maybe are in the school, like health curriculum, that is, a lot of parents can opt out. Is that a necessary curriculum? Maybe you can save money in that area in certain aspects. You know, cutting different other programs besides core academics. It always seems that core academics is always on the table, or busing, or teachers. You know, like the things that affect the classroom, so parents, you know, back down and maybe say, okay, here, take some more money. You know, so maybe some other things should be looked at too. That's just my comment. And I would like to know what other things are being discussed besides
I want to
busing.
address a number of your comments because I think they might not be fully informed about what we do here financially as a district.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things. One, our cost per pupil here is about $3,500 less per pupil than the average high school in the state of New Jersey. Our administrative staff is about 100 students less per administrator than the state of New Jersey. Our financial metrics are in the top 3 to 5 in every category in the state. So to say that we're not responsible, I take umbrage at that.
I don't mean you personally, I mean just in general, the feeling, it just seems that, you know, it's always raising our taxes or get more
But
money.
that's the state, that's not the
yeah.
school system. And that's why I would implore you to read my testimony
I will.
on the website to the Senate Assembly, to the Assembly Ed Committee, because one of the things that we pointed out is that while property wealth in this area over a 5-year period had only increased 9%, the state had increased what they determined our ability to pay here was by over 50%. So your taxes went up because the state said you are undertaxed. What the state, the argument in S2 right now, and having heard your comments about taxes, you hold on to your seat, is that you're undertaxed. You're actually undertaxed in this area. Now, we disagree with that. We think that the formula itself is fundamentally flawed.
Right.
And it has placed an undue burden on certain communities to pay. And we happen to live in one of those communities that has been unduly impacted. And so when we went, and to give you perspective on the referendum, we planned that referendum, we waited for that for 7 years. We waited till the tax impact of the construction of Colts Neck High School was coming off the books in order to not unduly impact our taxpayers. We engaged in an energy savings improvement plan in 2012 and 2013 to the tune of over $22 million that we bonded ourselves at no cost to the taxpayer in order to fund those programs without placing a burden on our taxpayer. We did not access banked cap like other districts. We didn't go for waivers. And then we waited another couple of years for that debt to come off in order to position that referendum when we did. And we were still giving 2/3 of that back as tax relief and using 1/3 to do the infrastructure things that we wanted to do. And so we've played the long game financially here. The state has changed the interpretation of the funding formula, and we've been caught in that wake.
Okay. So you said your testimony's on this Freehold
We
website?
have a whole webpage. I would encourage you to just say, because it has it has my testimony, it has some letters to state officials, it has a synopsis of what's happened over the past few years, and one of the things that we've also made note of publicly is, so every elected officials are talking about regionalization and the economy of scale and the benefits you get. We're the largest regional high school district in the state of New Jersey, and we do have an economy of scale, and that's why we are able to offer this at a more efficient price. And I would also encourage you to go back and look at some of our previous budget presentations, because Mr. Boyce has always done an excellent job of highlighting our return on investment for the money that it costs to do that compared to other school districts.
Right.
And we've always come out incredibly efficient in that. And it's a difficult position to be in. I've said that as our enrollments declined, we've eliminated, since 2010, an average of, I think it was 12 positions a year. So we've eliminated administrative across the board, not just classroom team. I don't play that game either. And it's not one of the things that we're not going to do with our public here is play the threatening game. Oh my gosh, if this doesn't happen and this is going to go. We're trying to be as upfront and honest about what we're trying to do as possible, so folks don't think that there's any games afoot or anything of that nature.
I appreciate that. I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll look up your testimony. I definitely want to read up more and understand this issue, because it's going to impact my kids not greatly in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final participant is Margaret Gerges. Is Margaret here? No? Okay, so that's that. May I have a motion to approve items G1 through K1?
Motion.
Just with the notation, remember G12 is not being offered.
G12 is not being offered. Any discussion? Sean, a roll call, please. Oh. Oh, we need a motion? Okay. Okay, now we have discussion.
All right, so as addended and as amended, Mr. Bruno.
I'm abstaining from G7, Jeanette Bruno, and K1, Dr. Sampson. And Dr. Hazel, and I vote yes for everything else.
Mrs. Cappiello?
Yes on everything except on K1, Dr. Hazel, I abstain.
Mrs. Davis?
And Dr. Sampson is going to go.
And Dr. Sampson.
Yes, except I abstain on K1, Adam Angelozzi, Rodney Taylor, Nicole Hazel, and Charles Sims.
Mrs. Lavin?
Yes.
Mr. Messenger?
Yes.
Mr. Parisi?
Yes.
Mr. Asatola?
Yes. Okay, old business. Are there any members wishing to discuss old business? None? How about new business? Any members wishing to discuss new business? Okay, time to adjourn. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Second by Liz Higley. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.